So why do nations compete and why do they fight? Well, it almost always comes down to two things: power and conflict. Today, we're going to dive deep into that tense and, let's be honest, unavoidable relationship between them and see how it really shapes the world we all live in. Let's get right into it.
To really get a handle on this global game, let's start with a super simple problem. Picture a couple. They want to spend time together, that's their shared goal, right? But one wants to see an opera and the other wants to watch boxing. Those are their conflicting interests. And believe it or not, this is what political scientists call a collective goods problem. It's the exact same dilemma countries face, just, on a much, much bigger scale.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll pin down what power even is. Then we'll take a look at what nations are actually fighting about. After that, we'll connect the dots and see why power so often leads to conflict, explore how the world tries to manage all these rivalries, and finally, we'll look at the new battlegrounds of the 21st century.
All right, first up, what in the world is power? Well, in international relations, it's pretty much everything. You can think of it as the currency that countries use to get what they want.
The classic definition is actually pretty simple and, well, powerful. Power is just the ability to make someone else do something they wouldn't have done on their own. It's all about influence, leverage, and ultimately changing behavior.
But what does national power really look like? When we hear that word, our minds usually jump straight to military force, tanks, jets, armies, the whole nine yards. And yeah, that's a huge piece of the puzzle, but it is definitely not the whole story. As you can see here, a country's economic muscle, its diplomatic skill, and even its cultural influence, all of that is absolutely crucial to its total power. And, this point gets driven home by someone you might not expect. This quote actually comes from a former U.S. Secretary of Defense, a military guy. He was arguing for more spending on diplomacy because he knew that in modern conflicts, which are often political right down to their core, you need way more than just military might to actually win.
So, if power is the currency, what's it being spent on? Let's jump to our next section and see how this all builds: the nature of conflict.
The Roman philosopher Seneca once pointed out that people usually focus on who won the war, not why it even started. But for those of us trying to actually understand the world, the cause is exactly what matters. Political scientists are always asking, what are the fundamental reasons nations go to war in the first place?
So, what do they fight over? It usually boils down to three main things. First, territory. Fighting over valuable land, access to the sea, or natural resources. It's classic. Second, trying to control other governments, putting friendly leaders in power or getting rid of hostile ones. And finally, you guessed it, economics. Clashes over trade, resources, and just pure financial dominance. Okay, so we've defined power and we've defined conflict. Now for the real heart of our explainer. Why does chasing power almost always seem to create conflict? Okay, this next point is absolutely crucial. The world operates in a state of anarchy. Now that sounds super dramatic, but it doesn't mean total chaos with people running in the streets. It just means there's no world government. There's no global 911 you can call when you have a fight with your neighbor. Every country is ultimately on its own to ensure its own security.
And that state of anarchy leads directly to this key idea, the security dilemma. Just imagine your neighbor buys a big, scary-looking guard dog. They tell you, hey, it's just for my own protection. But how does that make you feel? Probably a little less safe, right? So maybe you go out and build a higher fence. Well, in international relations, one country's defensive move is often seen by another as a potential threat, and that's what can kick off a spiral of military buildups.
We can actually explain this whole dynamic with something called game theory. And the India-Pakistan nuclear race is a perfect case study. Just look at the choices here. The best possible outcome for everyone is mutual cooperation. Neither of them builds nukes. But look at the logic from each country's point of view. If they build and I don't, I'm left at a massive disadvantage, so I have to build. What's the result? They both end up in a super costly and incredibly dangerous arms race, which is a worse outcome for both of them than if they had just cooperated from the start.
And this isn't just about weapons, by the way. The exact same logic applies to territory. When you have borders that were drawn up by old empires that don't match where different ethnic or cultural groups actually live, you get this constant simmering tension. We saw this play out tragically in the breakup of Yugoslavia and the division of Cyprus, where the struggle for security and control of land fueled these just brutal conflicts.
So, if anarchy and this security dilemma are constantly pushing nations toward conflict, how on earth do we avoid constant all-out war? Let's move to our next section and look at the main strategies for trying to manage these rivalries.
Well, there are really two major schools of thought here. On one hand, you have the balance of power. This is the realist approach. If one country gets too strong, other countries will team up in an alliance to balance them out. The whole goal is just to prevent any one nation from becoming too dominant. On the other hand, you've got liberal institutionalism. This approach is all about building institutions like the UN or the World Trade Organization to create rules and norms that encourage everyone to cooperate.
NATO is a textbook example of that balance of power strategy in action. After the Cold War, the alliance expanded eastward, bringing countries that used to be in the Warsaw Pact into its group. This was seen as a way to balance against any potential future aggression from Russia and to help stabilize new democracies. And on the other side of the coin, you have the United Nations. It's the ultimate expression of liberal institutionalism. Its purpose isn't to form an alliance against one specific threat, but to create a global framework where we can settle disputes peacefully, uphold international law, and just generally reduce the use of force altogether. Okay, for our final section, let's bring all of this into the here and now. How are power and conflict changing on the new battlegrounds of the 21st century? Well, one of the biggest changes is the rise of what we call non-state actors. And this definition is so important. Terrorism isn't an ideology itself. It's a tactic. It's a tool used by groups like Al-Qaeda. They can't challenge a powerful country with a traditional army, so they use violence against civilians to try and exert their power and achieve their political goals. And what about conflict that isn't violent at all? Think about globalization. It spreads ideas, music, brands all over the world. And while that connects us in a lot of great ways, it can also be seen as a threat to local cultures and identities. This can spark a backlash, a kind of cultural conflict where people push to preserve their own traditions against what feels like a wave of foreign influence. So, after all this, what does it mean for the future? The truth is, the very nature of power is changing right before our eyes. And that leaves us with one final, really crucial question to think about. As our world gets more and more interconnected, will the great power struggles of the future be fought with traditional armies on physical battlefields, or with information, with culture, and with influence in a digital world? That's the game being played right now.